All right, let's start. I think most folks are on. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very grateful that you all continue to show up to push for better reforms in the civil service world. My name is China Tyler, as you all know, state rep from Boston, and I am here pushing the effort to support and uplift the Special Legislative Commission to study and examine the civil service law. And today we are amongst our smaller working group, our smaller subcommittee, which will evaluate the feasibility of creating a statewide diversity office within the Executive Office of Administration and Finance, and and is working to establish affirmative action plans and guidelines for municipalities to oversee the implementation of these plans and guidelines to monitor noncompliance. In addition to this, commission is also charged to monitor the feasibility and cost of hiring or appointing a diversity officer for every city and town with a municipal police and or fire department. So I wanted to welcome you all, and I wanted to start off by doing a roll call for all the members. So when I say your name, you can just note that you're here. Sorry, I think it's died. One moment. Thank you. So first, I'd like to note, is Marcella King here? Here, okay. Michael P. Not here. Here. Okay. Sophia Hall. Here. Okay. Sorry to go there first. Chief Fiona. The chief here? No, okay. President Lopes. I know he said he's gonna come on any second. He's actually trying to get on, so I'm gonna hold on to his name. He just reached out to me. Stephen Gabriel.
Ma'am, Captain Walter Foley on behalf of Major Gabriel.
Okay, thank you so much for joining. Good morning, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. Ron Renaud, I see you here.
Present, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining. Acting Secretary Cheryl Poppy.
Hi, Cheryl Poppy is here.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining again. Kimberly Parr.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Robert Fernandez. I'll be here on behalf of Kim Parr for the AG's office.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Robert.
Yep.
Then myself, I'm present. And that is it. Did I miss anyone? Obviously, okay. Jen.
Yes. You missed me.
Yes.
Neil's here.
Yes. So Neil Osborne is here. I have you down present. Good afternoon, Neil. And Jen, I see you on as well.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Got everyone? Did I miss anyone? Okay.
Just a special guest from our office at HRD, Regina Caggiano.
Yes, Regina. How you doing, Regina? Good to see you again.
Good to see everyone. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right, so we'll jump right in, and I'll just start with the charges again. We've had some really fruitful discussion this week with our friends at ANF, and I'm very grateful for your expertise. And I know that we haven't met in a while, but I think that we're prepared to give the yay or nay and move forward. And we're going to be meeting as a whole committee tomorrow. And so our goal is to be able to jot down and agree upon a couple of recommendations that we can then present, and I'll present it on behalf of the group tomorrow to the full committee with our two charges. And so I read our two charges a little bit earlier, and I'll just read them just for discussion purposes, and then I'll jump into the agenda. So the first one, obviously, I read it again. I read it before, but I will read it again. To evaluate the feasibility of creating the statewide office and to establish an affirmative action plan, which is what that office will then do. And then the second task is to monitor the feasibility and cost of appointing a diversity officer here for every city and town here in the Commonwealth. And so I wanted to just start with that And I'll kind of split them up into two different conversations because they are two different conversations. And I guess we'll start with evaluating the feasibility of actually creating a statewide office within ANF. Yes, just recently I met with the chair, Gordon, and ANF, and we kind of went over realistically what this may look like if something like this were to be established. So I guess it is important to note for the record that something like this obviously currently isn't on the books. That's the reason why we're doing what we're doing here, to try to establish it. And so I wanted to just open up the discussion to talk about this issue topic and on the evaluation piece, because this potentially can be done. Again, I had the pleasure of meeting with ANF recently, and I learned a few things, and I want to share that with the group and then open up the floor for discussion to ask folks what their thoughts are on these couple of things that I learned. Obviously, the first thing is that the position doesn't currently exist, and that a position like this, I don't think that we're disagreeing if this position needs to be created or not. I mean, I feel like that's the obvious, and if someone disagrees, please jump in and we can have a discussion. But this position is definitely something that can be feasible. Usually positions like this, which we learned yesterday from ANF, are managerial style positions like director positions, obviously being leading in diversity. And the salary usually ranges in between 100 and 130,000-ish. The one question that I had when it came to creating this particular position was that there are 361 cities and towns in a Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and I just didn't think that one individual had the bandwidth to try to establish an affirmative action plan for every single city and town. It was just a lot, and so we talked about potentially adding maybe one or two staffers onto that group to be able to make it an office, and so that way they can have the ability to be able to actually fluidly and realistically do the work. So let's start there. And I just want to know what folks thought about that, and what do folks think? And folks can raise your hand, use your hand raising function, and we can start there. All right, I see Jen's hand up first. You can go first, Jen.
Thank you. With no disrespect meant to anything, I feel very unprepared to be making recommendations today. I would have loved to have a conversation with ANF about what it would take to establish this, what we think it would look like for municipalities, what that interaction would be like, how will affirmative action plans play in with things like civil service lists and other hiring practices that are in place? What about communities that have diversity officers already working? How will that play? I think I have more questions at this point than answers. I think you made a great point. There's 351 communities and one director and even two staffers. That feels like a big lift for a small office. And I guess I'm not clear on how affirmative action plans for full municipalities is within the scope of this commission, since we're looking at police and fire. And then if we're just going back to police and fire, my question again is, how does that play in with the civil service process that currently exists and lists? How would an affirmative action plan and a civil service list play together? I'm just not clear. So I feel very unprepared to be making recommendations for tomorrow, and really wish we had some more time to talk through some of these items. And have our full subcommittee, present for these conversations, because I think we're missing a lot of important voices for this conversation as well.
All right, thank you.
I'd like to start there.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I mean, the beauty of this conversation is that we do have Ron and Regina on the call. So if you do have specific questions, you're more than welcome to ask at any given time. So with that, I'm going to call on Ron because you had your hand up second, and then Cheryl, you had your hand up third. So Ron, would you like to go second?
Sure. Thank you, Secretary, for yielding. What I think may be beneficial to all right now is to ask Regina just to share the same conversation we had with Rep. Tyler and Rep. Gordon the other day, and literally it was the other day. So just to say what's in place today and what's in place, what we believe is the outreach of capability that we currently have and what we need to supplement it to achieve the goals that Rep. Tyler is stating. So if I may, I'm going to yield the floor without anybody's objection to Regina and just basically ask her to tell what's in place today and what we talked about the other day and how that fits into the overall org chart at ANF. Maybe that'll help, Jen.
Regina?
All right. Thank you, Secretary Poppy, for deferring the floor. And thank you, Ron. So I think taking a step back, civil service for police departments covers about 142-ish. For fire departments, it's 109. So with the transition of almost a year ago, going to annual exams to help supplement these eligible lists as opposed to just every 2 years, recruitment has become really important in not only attracting individuals to take this exam, but also a diverse group of applicants to take our exams. So we network with our partners in municipalities and try and assist them with outreach. Each municipality knows their city or town best. They know where to do outreach. Civil service is charged with literally assisting them. So we've looked at those departments that had people of color over 20%, over 15%, and really concentrated our efforts in those municipalities. We certainly would add in other municipalities when they requested. We looked at creating our exam posters and flyers in 9 different languages. We do offer the exam in Spanish. We did outreach to diversity officers in municipalities if they had one. A lot of times that falls on someone in a police department or a fire department or an HR department. We gathered all kinds of pictures and created videos. They're 20-second videos that we launched on and provided to each municipality for them to put on their website, whether it's the city or town's website or the police department's website. Because again, if I want to become a police officer in Bedford, I'm not going to go to civil service HRD in Boston. I'm going to go to Bedford. So we tried to give these flyers and videos to the municipalities to post. We're available for open houses. Even during our COVID pandemic, we did those remotely, where used to be in person. So as our trend is continuing to go in the right direction with more people of color applying to take this exam, but there's always opportunities to do more and do better.
Regina, if I may, not to prompt you, but could you share some of the statistics that we've been trending?
Sure. So some of the statistics that I presented was even going back to 2017, and this is for police. In 2017, applicants, people of color, were around 30.6%. In 2022, it's increased to 42.2%. So that's an 11% increase over those years. So the outreach is doing well. Municipalities are doing well in attracting diverse candidates to take the exam.
So it sounds like, and this is something that I know that we discussed in the past, was that obviously recruitment and making it more feasible for folks to, gain access to that opportunity is something that obviously falls within this umbrella. So thank you, Regina. Let's go to Cheryl next, just because she had her hand up for a little bit, and then we'll go back if she has any questions. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I had a question in my mind, but thanks to Ron and Regina, I have a little bit more answer. I guess, and you hit the nail on the head, Ron, when you talked about org chart. I guess I've been trying to picture an org chart in my mind as to what this would actually look like in this office, because clearly one person can't do it all. You'd have to have a couple of staff to support. I'm also thinking about how this would interface with the cities and towns, because every 351 communities are different. And if you had someone assigned at a city and town, I know I'm going into two questions at once, I apologize, but I'm just trying to think, overall, if that person would need support, or if they would be working closely with the administrative staff of the HR department in the municipality of that department. I'll also say that I was a diversity officer and an ADA coordinator and wrote affirmative action plans. So I know how much work there is in that position when you're a diversity officer. There's a lot. So because I think I may have missed a meeting earlier, so there may have been other discussions that I wasn't part of. So I might be getting ahead of it. But that was just kind of the question that I just had out there of how that would work, because I think you'd want to see consistency, not that every city and town is the completely cookie cutter, but you would want to have some standards that are consistent through the cities and towns as they apply this with diversity, with everything that we've been trying to look at with diversity, equity, inclusion. And maybe there's no answer to my question, but I'm just.
Sorry, Ron.
Thank you, Rip. Secretary, your point is well taken. And what we discussed the other day was basically having a diversity officer for this purpose and working within the HRD parameters into everything that Regina and her folks do on a daily basis, but have this person be more the spearhead, if you will, for this program, and be able to roll out a lot of the template type programs. If it could be videos that are created and then sent out for recruitment across. I'm just freeballing on this thing, just sending out videos across all the different communities and let them plug and play their own special messages, but show how to reach out. It could be coming up with a marketing plan, if you will, on community, and Rep. Tyler and I would discuss this, community organizations and different outreach centers and different community colleges and things of that nature. So this person could be the person who is in charge of developing the master plan, if you will. And then, as Rep. Tyler mentioned a little earlier, that we talked about possibly having two assistants, if you will, and maybe they're broken up by either function or they're broken up by geography on who they support. Not sure, not clear. None of this is crystallized at this point, but all I can respectfully suggest is that there seems to be a need, there seems to be a desire, there seems to be the willingness. There are not enough resources currently in HRD, so this would have to be specially funded, created. We also talked about having the responsibility of this new director type position to basically create an annual report to the legislature. And I don't want to say it like this, but something to this effect, justifying their existence, justifying their results, making sure it's just not another bureaucratic job, but it's actually creating value, and it's addressing the mission that we're setting out to accomplish. So it's those types of things. And I think that's where Jen started off as well, and most of the questions. So that's sort of the framework that we just started to touch upon, that there is a need, at least in my personal opinion, there's a need for additional resources. How much, where, I leave that to the folks who actually vote on it, but that's where we're at.
Thank you for that. And I wanted to add on to the annual report. That was kind of like a really big popular thing that's really pretty popular out there. There's one thing to have diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it is nothing without accountability. And so having this role, for example, take on, reporting back annually on, what they're doing and the goals that they're setting out to do, will allow for us to be able to continue to monitor, to monitor this role. So I just think annual reporting is something that we definitely should put out in recommendations for tomorrow. Thank you for that, Ron. Jen, I saw you had your hand up again.
I do, thank you. That was all very helpful. I love hearing the ideas about videos, marketing, outreach. I think that's exactly what we need and what would be great. So this, as I'm listening, it's sounding more like a diversity recruitment marketing officer to help HRD statewide with recruitment for police and fire. And that sounds really exciting and really, really helpful based on all of the statistics we've been hearing about how many people are signing up for the exams, period, let alone, you know, when we dig into the data and look at the diversity of who's signing up. That sounds really exciting. And I think maybe if we can explore the idea of this person or persons, if they have two assistants under them, being able to provide tools for municipalities, right? What Rep. Tyler was just saying about the reporting, and right, we need better data. And I think we know that from listening to all our commission meetings, that data is a challenge. So being able to maybe have this office in this position help municipalities understand how to collect some of that data, I think could be really helpful, because then it would be the same message going across the whole state, and hopefully eventually the same type of data being collected in the same sort of way. So I hope we can make a recommendation that makes this as a resource to municipalities, because I think that will be very well received and well supported, and really help get at some of the charges and areas of concern that we've been looking at over these past many months. I've lost track as to how many months we've been at this now. But I think that starts to really touch on a lot of the areas we've been talking about, either, you know, in this meeting or at the full commission or some of the other subcommittees.
Yes, thank you for that commentary. Yes, so just to go back to the charge of the commission, this is a statewide, will be a statewide role. And I think you're right, you know, having it kind of report out best practices, if you will, so that folks can kind of be more uniform as to how this data is collected, and how it shows up on some of our public platforms is very important. And once we create those uniform ways, we can then, you know, set goals as to how many Black, Latino, people of color, veterans, or whatever we want to have on the job. So absolutely, that's something that we were thinking. Does anybody else have any questions? Questions? Yeah.
One more
Okay.
thing, Rep, if I may.
Yeah.
Just to share with the rest of the team. The other day, we also discussed, and I know Rob Quinnan is on from Civil Service, but we also discussed the fees for exams, and sort of it's like a barrier for entry, if you will. And we talked a little bit about that, but it's something I think that dovetails with this whole process, making it easier, getting more people to apply, etc. But I just want to throw that out there. And I know Rob that's more where he focused than I did.
Well, and Ron, I think we were talking about potentially empowering these new HRD personnel to offer waivers or partial waivers of exam fees. And people have also talked about a suggestion that repeat exam takers perhaps should be given a discount, particularly if examinations are given every year. If someone has signed up to take the 2022 exam, then in the year 2023, you know, perhaps they should only be required to pay a fraction of what they paid to take the exam in 2022.
And I think Regina also mentioned the other day that there currently is a waiver process available, but it's something we could look at to either expand or just make the world know about it a little bit better.
And I don't know whether that is limited to people who receive public assistance. And if so, you know, perhaps that doesn't really sufficiently diminish the barrier to entry to some young person who's, you know, 21, 22 years old, wants to become a firefighter. is trying to establish themselves as an independent person, their income tax return might show, very little income, and yet they're not on public assistance because they're potentially still supported by their parents. Do we want to do something for that person?
Yeah. I have a question for the committee. What do folks think about, potentially recommending that this statewide office has has a budget? What I've learned in the past is that, you can task groups in different organizations and different departments with, as much as you'd like them to, but this department seems like it needs a little bit more flexibility to be able to go a little bit more wide on some of their initiatives, obviously like the waivers, and just, other items that we mentioned earlier. So what do folks think about, possibly recommending that this office can have a budget of some sort to be able to be more flexible with?
Well, speaking on behalf of ANF, we never get that offer. We're usually the ones that everyone asks. So if there was, funding that would come in first and foremost on the serious side, I think it would be beneficial. But I don't know to what level, but it would give people more flexibility as all of this starts to build and grow, if you will, and we see what we need. It gives that director the flexibility to, to address things as it comes. So yeah, great suggestion, Rep, if that can happen.
Yeah. So the test fee waivers, so that's one. Can you hear me now? Sorry, my internet service is a little bad. So the fee waiver for the test is something that obviously is a big deal. It could hinder someone that is low income to any degree from actually applying. And so when we talk about funding, we can, recommend that this office, has a funding pool or specific budget, items to be able to have funding. And I think that specifically we should note that, these funds definitely should be focused for fee waivers, and that there should be some type of goal and or mandate for offering fee waivers. Just because when you're giving an office a budget, once the money is spent, it's spent. But if it's not intentionally sent out, then it kind of creates a problem once the money goes that way. So I would like to see fee waivers, that program continue to be, supported and expanded, if you will. These tests aren't cheap, and if it paying for the test is getting in between someone being on or off a force. That's something that we can address today. And so I just want to put that out there for the group. I saw you had your hand up, Rob.
Yes, I also just wanted to echo what Ron said and say that also, in particular, having some funds available to experiment, to launch a pilot program. If, for example, it's observed that some particular process is having an adverse impact on minority candidates, being able to put in place an alternative that would not have any adverse impact on any group of potential candidates, would be very beneficial. And there are probably other proposals that the full commission will come up with that will require some funding. But having this new unit within HRD be able to coordinate some of the other proposals, such as creating a diversity pipeline from community colleges to municipal fire departments. Again, you'd probably want to start with a pilot program, and to make it successful, you probably have to put some funding into it. And this may be an appropriate place for the repository of funds for that purpose.
Does anyone else have any comments on this first charge? Yeah, okay. Okay. So we can move forward then. Thank you so much, Regina, very helpful. And the information that you shared is very helpful. I just want to say thank you again. And so I feel like our second piece of our charge kind of mirrors the first piece, but I'll just state it anyways and open up the floor for discussion. That way folks can, we can have as fruitful a discussion as we can possibly have. And the second piece to our charge here for the subcommission is to monitor the feasibility and cost of hiring and or appointing a diversity officer for every city and town. So we may have already obviously covered it in this discussion, but monitoring the feasibility. So that's that annual report that we noted. And so I just wanted to hear what folks thought about reporting. Do folks think it should be on an annual basis? For something as, as fluid like this folks testing every year, it's kind of, the volume is kind of high. Would you want to see something biannually? What are folks' thoughts on this particular item of the feasibility of actually appointing this officer? Monitoring the feasibility of appointing this officer. As a state rep, obviously, we really love annual reports. We rely on them heavily to not only, continue to support initiatives, but to be able to show us other things that we may not be able to see with our own naked eyes and through our work. And having numbers on paper is very important, and it does open up discussion to, maybe able to collect more data in the future. I'm a big fan of jotting down data because it actually shows us a picture, again, that we may not see with the naked eye. So I'm in support of it. The annual report is kind of common standard for us. I'm happy with that. But I'm going to open up the floor to hear what folks think about just, monitoring this role. Cheryl, do you want to go first? And then Jen, I see your hand up next.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. So my questions on the, I had two with the reports. I mean, obviously, I don't know if you're looking for us to come up with what you think needs to be in them, or unless everyone's very familiar with what you would normally require in the report itself. And then the second question would be, given the fact of when exams are given, what that timing would be of the report. And that may be a simple answer, but I know, for example, diversity reports that we used to do in affirmative action, they would do in September. So not quite the fiscal year end or the calendar year end, but kind of along so that you could be pulling the data to track, especially if you have a significant event like an exam happening and then you got to report right away. You may not have all the data for that. So those are my questions on point, just for consideration as we make these recommendations.
Thank you. Those are really good points. Obviously, once folks take the test, that's like the most raw data that you can possibly extract when it comes to this, this process. So I definitely agree that having a report that gives us those numbers after folks actually test, that way we can see, from testing date, whether you pass or fail, whatever it is, who's testing, all the way to when you're actually on the force, it can tell us what's happening in that middle picture and what we need to do to be able to create more equity for upward mobility in those spaces. So I definitely agree with that. That's a really great point, Cheryl. Jen, do you want to go next?
Sure, thank you. Can you clarify, are you specifically looking for this office to do reporting on specifically who's taking the civil service exam at the state level?
So let me go back. The charge is to monitor the feasibility of the cost in hiring this particular role. So we can make that recommendation if we'd like, but I would just like to, as far as monitoring, the more information and the more raw data you have, the better you can be able to hold this commission accountable to create more equity is the point. So I would not be opposed to that. No, absolutely not.
So can you just point to me where you're seeing that? Sorry, because I'm looking at the charge and I'm obviously missing.
So the commission shall monitor the feasibility and cost of hiring or appointing a diversity officer for every city and town with the municipal police or fire department.
Right.
Yes.
So what I'm hearing though is we're talking about creating a position at a state level, not hiring a diversity officer for every city in town.
Right. So we're
Right.
creating one state level position, and what as far as monitoring that. So for us on the outside and for us in our outside roles as advocates and as supporters of making sure that this space is equitable, in order to be able to make sure that this civil service role is doing what it's supposed to be doing. Monitoring is making sure that they're reporting, pretty much.
Right. I understand that, but the way I read this is saying the cost and feasibility of hiring somebody for every city in town. And this is very,
Yeah, so this role is going to cover every city and town.
okay. I was reading that a little bit differently and I just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page. Okay.
Okay. Neil, you have your hand up. Do you want to go?
Yeah, so I have a slightly different take at this. I see monitoring as putting a toe into the water to test it out when I think we need to really jump in. I think it's to advantage of every city and town to have a diversity officer continually working on this until we get to true equity. So if I was to suggest an action, it would be, how do we help every city and town have a diversity role? Some cities and towns already have it. That meaning it wouldn't be any huge additional cost, but finding a way to encourage them to tell their citizens, this is important enough for us that we are going to hire someone to make sure that we are doing better. So I guess I'd like to take it one step further, not just monitor, but find a way to make it happen for every municipality.
So earlier, I forget who mentioned this, but they pretty much mentioned something like this role is to be able to, share with every municipality, city and town, best practices that they can take on. So if that's something that folks here want to agree with, I'm happy to do that. And how they could potentially do that is through supporting, cities and towns. But then, then there's the opt-in, opt-out. Then it kind of opens up a can of worms. I'm in support of it. I do think that cities and towns should, have their own diversity office because it's a little bit more, holds them a little bit more accountable. But I definitely, as far as statewide is concerned, like, we definitely need this first established role to be able to offer them support from the state to be able to do these things, because if not, then they're not going to be reporting to anybody. We won't ever probably see this information ever again. Or if they are to do annual reporting, it'll go to that municipality, not to the state. So what do folks think about that? Jen?
I'm happy to jump in. I'll just say Danvers is currently hiring a diversity officer. We're doing interviews this week. Actually, Neil has been a good resource for me as we've tackled interviews. So I fully agree that municipalities should have this role. I like the idea that the rep just shared about kind of starting at the state level, especially within the scope of this commission. I think we would be a little outside of our scope. But I think having the state take this action sends a very powerful message to the rest of the Commonwealth about where the state is at, where we're at, where the commission's at, and what we believe in. And I think that's the right message to be sending. So I don't disagree with what Neil said, but I think I'm supportive in this setting of the statewide that we're talking about.
So would folks want to, recommend that this committee, suggest that this role, whatever diversity officers are hired on the municipality level, that they have to report to the state role, because you have to create some type of relationship between the two roles that, we're recommending here. And so Neil, I guess I would defer back to you on that and just hear your thoughts on that. How would you imagine that relationship to be?
So the relationship has to be built. So I can share the example in Medford. The diversity officer reports directly to the mayor. So if there's a statewide office that's doing the encouraging, you have to build a relationship. So Medford now sees value in sharing as much information with the state. And even though the direct report is still to the mayor. So you have to build the right relationship so you can get the data and help these officers, these individuals going into these roles, do great work to create the data, because there's a group of folks in this profession who are starting to move around because cities and towns aren't paying enough. So you take your skills to the next city and town that truly values you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So we can write that. We can create those points in our recommendations for sure. So I'll jot that down and make sure that in our final kind of points we note that. I saw Cheryl had her hand up. Do you want to go?
Hi, thank you again, Madam Chair. So I guess my concern with it, the cities and towns levels, and it is wonderful that there are cities and towns that have a diversity officer in place. And I'm using the analogy of our department with, say, veteran service officers in every city and town. We don't control them. We provide guidance, we provide support. Obviously, we provide funding for the benefits, but we don't fund the VSO. So and someone can enlighten me more, would we, if we ask cities and towns to have this person, is there any way we could help them with that funding? Because I know not every city and town is funded the same. And so I would be concerned about putting in a requirement that wasn't funded, but that is really what we do with veteran service officers. We say you have to have a veteran service officer by law. So would you be creating that, I guess, in the general law? And I guess there's no way we could fund those positions at the state level or something, but just the expectation the community would do that. And can they do that is just my overarching question.
That's a good question. Ron, do you want to go?
Sure. There's the concept that Neil brought, I think is the one I share. The person in this director's position has to have value. The person in this has to have resources. So that goes to what the secretary just said, as well as having maybe a budget, Rep. Tyler, that some of this budget can go to these smaller towns to help them do programs, to go to the community college, that's maybe a town or two over from them, to do some recruiting. Not everybody's a Medford, not everybody's a Boston, not everybody has all the resources. So without creating more bureaucracy and increasing cost, just to, be respectful of taxpayer dollars. This one person has to have value. I think that should be measured in their annual report on how much outreach they've done. And to go back to your question you asked earlier, to me, it starts at an annual basis, an annual report, not 6 months or anything like that, because it's going to take a year for this person to really reach out, and at least a year to make a significant impact. So anyway, going to that, just a small budget for these municipalities, work with municipalities, maybe put on events like once a year, or every 6 months, all the diversity officers from around the state get together, share best practices, talk about, things that are happening nationally, programs that, whatever. Talk about people who left civil service and, because, it gave them more flexibility and they didn't hire minorities. Talk about things like that, and, just use it for forum building.
Cheryl, is your hand still up or? Okay. I'd like to welcome Officer Dr. Lopes on the call from AMLIO. Thank you so much for joining. Appreciate you joining. And I think that we're kind of winding down to putting something on paper. So I wanted to go back and review some items that we already discussed for Dr. Loeb's purposes, and just for the fruitful discussion. And if folks want to make some adjustments, like the floor is open to make these adjustments. So the first thing we talked about, the first charge, obviously evaluating the feasibility. We know it's needed. We all agree here that this particular role is needed. We refer to it as somewhat of a director type style role, which will then share best practices to municipalities as to how they should go about carrying on these charges with civil service, and also to doing some work around marketing and outreach as far as and uplifting diversity in general. We also noted that we would like to see some type of reporting after testing to make sure that folks that we know who actually took the test, and also too on some type of annual or some type of scheduled basis. We also noted as well. We also noted that under their umbrella, we would like to see some type of funding sent their way so that they can be able to be more flexible in figuring out in creating a more diverse civil service world. Those pilot programs can include things like their fee waiver program, for example, which is one of very many that we mentioned. We also too mentioned that monitoring, which was very big as well, and that we wanted to ensure that, again, we're receiving this information as it's being collected, and that it's being collected correctly. And then lastly, just recently, we also mentioned potentially having this director style role work on uplifting every municipality to have its own diversity director. And so those are the bigger items that I have right now down. Do folks have any questions or want to add on or agree and or disagree with anything that was said? Dr. Lopes, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you. And again, my apologies for being late. The other meeting I had ran a little late. But what I wanted to add is that we really need to look at what the diversity officer's role really looks like. I'd encourage, and if we could get him in, to bring in Michael Gaskins, the outgoing diversity officer for the Boston Police Department, who is leaving the Boston Police Department because of the lack of investment in his work and the work that he was doing at the Boston Police Department. I mean, he did some remarkable work around diversity, equity, inclusion, bringing in cadets, diverse cadets, and really going out and marketing policing as a career. But I feel like his work was undervalued, and he has some really has a really unique experience that he could share around what that looked like. So I think he's somebody that we should bring in, or at least have a conversation with, because I think he's been in the role. He's seen how a big city can oversee and diversity officer. Because, you know, we can assign a diversity officer or allocate a diversity officer to every municipality, but if that diversity officer doesn't have the power to do their work, doesn't have the support from the municipality, and have their support from the mayor's office and the budget to do the work, then what's the point of having the diversity officer? But also note that diversity officer can't do the work alone, and the municipalities really need to invest in what does that team that supports a diversity officer, what that looks like, and how that can be beneficial to the overall mission of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Noted. Thank you, Dr. Lopes. And we did also to discuss having this director role, having a couple of extra support staff to be supportive, as we did note that there are 361 plus cities and towns here in the Commonwealth. And so having one person take this on is quite a bit of a big charge. And so I just want to note that that was something that we had mentioned a little earlier. So I want to continue on the conversation. Thank you for that. Jen.
Thank you. In the charge, it does speak to establishing affirmative action plans for municipalities and monitor for non-compliance. And we haven't talked about that. I like the direction we've gone in, which seems more cooperative than mandatory and non-compliance. And I think some of the things we've touched upon about, as Ron was just saying, about getting data and needing at least a year to understand and really collect that data and get some information. I would definitely not be comfortable with saying we were going to establish right off the bat affirmative action plans and monitor for compliance for each municipality, because I don't have an understanding of how. I'm not saying I'm not supportive of that idea, but I don't know how it would work and what it would look like. So I would not be comfortable moving forward with a recommendation that included that.
Okay. Again, these are, okay, actually, I'll just, thank you. Rob, do you want to go? And then Jeff, you have your hand up as well?
Yeah, I think in perhaps direct response to that, and I don't know how good of an analogy this is, but I think about City of Boston's requirements with respect to minority participation in city contracts, I think particularly around construction. And my understanding is that there are no penalties associated. So targets are set. It's determined by the city that there should be a certain percentage of participation by women-owned businesses or minority-owned businesses in contracts that the city oversees. There is an annual reporting requirement. And my understanding is that there are fines and penalties associated with not complying with the reporting, but that there is no sanction or penalty for not meeting your target. And I'm wondering if that would be an appropriate model, at least at this point in time, for the work here. That perhaps there should be something in whatever legislation might come out of our efforts here that would actually put some teeth into the obligation of the cities and towns to present the requested data to the state human resources division, and that there would be an ability to fine communities that do not meet that obligation. But we could be very clear that there's no sanction, there's no penalty, et cetera, associated with not meeting any target that may have been set for diversity, outreach, equity initiatives.
So I'd like to uplift that, because this is something that, again, is very prevalent in the city of Boston, with like folks not meeting target goals. Let's talk construction, for example. That's a very like popular one. And so the problem that we have and that we're facing in the legislature is that a lot of these targets are defined as benchmarks. And a benchmark is something that you aspire to be able to do, versus a mandate is that like it's a hard number that we need you to meet. So I definitely agree with you on that there needs to be some teeth in this. And if we do go in that direction, then again, the floor is still open to discuss, which I totally support, and hope that the group support me in this and pushing for this, is that we create some, is that we use the word mandate rather than benchmark, because it, it then now pushes for hard numbers. So yeah. Jen?
Again, and I'm sorry to keep, I don't know enough about what would we be mandating, what data are we looking for municipalities to collect, how would they collect it? How are the numbers and the targets established? I don't think we're talking about, I think we're going down the right path, but I don't think we have enough information to be making a recommendation on setting mandates for affirmative action for communities at this point.
I think that, just pushing that there are to be mandates, because again, this is a state level role. And so we have to be careful not to make this role too specific to where they're now bulging into doing municipality work. But I do think that, again, just like we task them with putting out best practices, we can task them with trying to figure out how they can set mandates for each municipality so that they can actually be diverse, which is the purpose of this whole commission. So yeah, there's that. Ron, did you want to go?
Yeah, I'm going cautious on this piece as well, because I think I want to, like, if it was up to me, I'd establish the role first, see what is out there, get a plan in place before I put any kind of mandates or requirements or whatever, and see how it can be rolled out and rolled up. Part of what Rob said, I agree with. Part of it I disagree with. The part I agree with is more the roll up of information without sanctions, without without penalty. So as we start to transition, I'd rather take like steps than just jump off the diving board on this one. So it's like, you should, you shall, whatever the legal term is, report up to the state diversity officer. And then we can start compiling data. And then a year from now, when you get the annual report, then you can say, okay, not enough progress is made. We have a problem, or this is great, and let's expand it to these other areas. I don't know, that I'm just a little more cautious than jumping all in, day one.
Rob?
Could I ask Regina, I know that the civil service communities are required to file an annual form. I think it's called Form 67 with HRD that reports on the demographics of the public safety departments that participate in HRD examinations, police and fire at least. And I think you've told me in the past that there is no sanction for not filing that information with HRD, but since that has been a legal mandate for many, many years, what would be the argument for not putting a little more teeth into requiring that sort of basic demographic data be shared between communities and HRD?
Rob, under Chapter 31, you're absolutely correct. It's under Chapter 31, Section 67, in which those municipalities under civil service annually provide a 67 report. I think it's first incumbent on us to create a report that is easily able to report from. We've moved an old paper document onto an electronic format that has drop-down buttons so that it's easy to maintain that document, keep it, and then just add in the new individuals that are hired and are promoted for each municipality. So I would have to go back and take a look at what our reporting from our municipalities are, but as we've established a lot better dialogue with how important these 67 reports are in terms of outreach and recruitment, and knowing what the makeup of the departments are, and then knowing the demographics of the community, and then really working with each municipality, because each municipality really is different. So where are there opportunities to increase diversity in municipalities? So I'll have to get back to the committee on what our reporting is. 2021, I know it was somewhere in the 60–70% rate of return. And 2022, we really just launched it. I believe the deadline is in March. So we're sending out another reminder to our partners in the municipalities to fill out those forms.
Yeah, I mean, not that I would want to be punitive in the approach, but nevertheless, it seems to me that if this is a statutory mandate, a 60 or 70% response rate is really not acceptable. Because this is important data that the public has a right to know how different cities are faring with respect to a public service, such as policing and fire services. I mean, we put a lot of money into supporting these public safety departments, and maybe the process is not as simple or efficient or whatever as it could be, and so maybe there's room for improvement on both sides, but I think the bottom line is that we have to aim for better than a 60 or 70% response rate.
Jeffrey? Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, I have to agree with Rob, and I really want to just say that if we're talking about diversity and we're talking about baby steps in 2022, I have a serious issue with that. Mandates need to happen. This is a legislative requirement, and I don't think we should be taking baby steps with it. These are things that our towns and municipalities have known for decades and have ignored and neglected. So I think I have an issue with people saying we should take baby steps as we approach diversity, equity, inclusion issues.
How about we do this? What do folks think about having one of the charges of this director style role that we're trying to create to work with each municipality to create mandates? How do folks feel about that? Because now that's a different discussion. Jeffrey, do you want to start first?
I just think that mandates need to happen. I think the only way to hold municipalities accountable is to have mandates in place. There's no other way to keep people accountable.
Neil?
So my quick thought is I like carrots. If we have a director's role for the state and they have a budget that can be used to support work Well, you turn in the form, then you become eligible for funding. So it's, hey, we're doing a lot. Other communities are doing a lot. You play along. You file your timely documents that shares data. We'll help fund you.
Mm.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
So if I were to articulate that back to you, they have to, so this director role would work with municipalities to, I mean, they would have to, sorry, can you run that back one more time just so I can?
Sure.
try to-
So
Yeah.
we're talking about the 67 form that each civil service municipality should be filing. Well, what if we tie that into being eligible for funding? If you don't have that form filed, you can't get any funding. And if this director position has enough budget, cities and towns would want to get the funding so they can do better. So it's a carrot mechanism to get people to comply.
Mm-hmm. Are there, and this is a question for Regina, are there pieces of the 67 form, and I know that we went over this pretty extensively the other day, but I just have a question. Are there pieces of the form that you would say are more revealing as far as numbers are concerned than others? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
The 67 report actually captures a multitude of fields. One of them is ethnicity, gender, civil service seniority date, the rank that they're in. So those are kind of the key elements there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Jen?
Thank you. I think they're, tying to what Rob was saying, is an opportunity to expand the 67 report to maybe,
Have this diversity office at the state level, do some investigation on what other fields could we include that would be helpful. But the thing the 67 report won't capture is the outreach and what marketing outreach was done, because this is only capturing officers and firefighters currently on your department. So it starts, I think it's moving in the right direction, but it does miss what type of marketing and outreach and efforts were undertaken to try to increase the diversity. But I think, if a charge of the new office is to come up with some metrics, that's great, right? I don't think in the next few minutes, we're going to come up with those metrics ourselves. But I think coming up with those and knowing that we already do have one avenue using the form 67, if that can be expanded upon, and for current makeup of the department, but then how do we look at outreach and what other efforts are underway? And maybe that's less of a mandate or metrics and more around communication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're not going to come up with those numbers today. Like that is, we don't, that's not our charge to come up with those numbers, but we can task this role to come up with those numbers. And I think that that's a wonderful idea. And again, benchmarks versus mandates, those are two totally different things. And if we're actually trying to be serious about, diversifying this field, they need to be mandates. And I think that this role is totally equipped to be able to do that. Ron, did you want to say anything?
I just want to make sure that in our report, when we talk about minorities, we also mention specifically women and veterans.
Okay. So it's already past 2:00 and I really want to be respectful of folks' time. I feel like we covered quite a bit of ground today, and I'm very grateful for you all continuing to show up. So what I can do is I can type these things out and clean them up and kind of talk and share over minutes and kind of some key points that we went over today. Tomorrow, you all know that the entire committee is going to meet. And again, we can have discussions on the full committee meeting, but I want us to get to a place where we have a core of what we'd like to see with this statewide diversity office and or role. So I wanted to just open the floor again for final words or final discussions or final thoughts or anything that you'd like to add to what was already discussed and or change. And if not, then we can close out the meeting, and I will send you an email within the next 30 minutes to be able to share these points before I should send them to the chair. So I just want to open up the floor for any of the last comments or questions or concerns or burning issues or anything that folks want to say.
I suppose I really like what Neil had to say about using incentives for the state to obtain the information it needs to be able to monitor diversity, equity, inclusion, outreach, et cetera, efforts in many different communities. We might want to consider giving the personnel administrator discretion to rely principally on incentives, but where necessary, if a community really is being recalcitrant, allowing for some appropriate penalty. But I hope that mainly there would be enough funding in this new unit within HRD for communities to see the benefits of cooperating with the state and using it as a key to unlock eligibility for significant, recruitment, marketing help from the state. So hopefully that does create a virtuous cycle where, communities then want more help, and they actually start producing some good results.
That's the goal. Thank you, Rob. Appreciate it. Does anyone else have any final comments or words? It's 2:10. Okay. Wonderful. All right. So I would like to close the meeting officially and thank everyone for joining. And please look out for an email from me to the entire group. And if you like to comment, feel free to reply all that way we can continue to engage. And don't forget, the full committee is meeting tomorrow. And I look forward to seeing you on that meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Stay warm.
Right.